there's a way to make an entrance.
This is my destiny.
It was now a conspiracy of witches.
Download Veely today.
I was born in Turkey in the 1980s, to a Turkish father and a British mother. Although Turkey has been a secular country since the 1920s, the influence of the Ottoman Empire can be felt everywhere. The population is largely Muslim, and while I wasn't raised in religion, I felt its presence every day. I've always felt comfort in the idea of a creator, and the idea of another life after this one. I've never really considered the idea of there being nothing. It seems almost ridiculous to think that we just appeared on this tiny planet without explanation, and when we die, we just disappear without a trace. I believe that spirits and ghosts are just a form of energy that we don't yet understand, and it's only a matter of time before we discover the true nature of this phenomena. Evidence of the paranormal is notoriously hard to come by, but perhaps people have been looking in the wrong places. All it would take is one cast iron piece of proof to change everything.
From an early age, as young as I can remember, I was terrified of the devil. This fear stayed with me into adulthood, but work and everyday life intervened, and I gave it less and less thought. It was only when I came to question my faith that I started to think about it again. In my 30s, over a period of about 18 months, I went from being an Anglican Christian to an agnostic, and finally a fully fledged atheist. It was almost sad to lose the sense of belonging, and more importantly, the promise of something after this life. But for me, it just rang true. One upside of this change was that even though I'd lost the comfort of a God, I'd also lost any fear of the devil. Even though I'm utterly convinced by atheism, there's still so much that science struggles to explain. I don't believe in spirits, ghosts, or demons. I think they're nothing more than inventions of our collective imagination.
As a believer
and a non-believer, we've decided to look into as many facets of the supernatural as we can. I want to be challenged and have my take on the paranormal question.
I want to show that supernatural phenomena are just aspects of our universe that we simply don't fully understand yet.
We'll speak to experts in the field on both sides of the argument.
Psychics, skeptics, demon hunters,
and academics, to see if we can finally discern if there really is something on the other side.
When we first started thinking about this, it became clear that it would be impossible to cover everything. The supernatural is a virtually limitless subject, so we needed to think about what to focus on. We decided to begin with an ancient phenomena that has gained increasing momentum in recent years.
Exorcism is a religious practice where an evil spirit or demon is said to be evicted from the body of a person they have physically possessed. It is an ancient ritual shared by many belief systems and cultures around the world. This procedure is normally carried out by a priest or spiritual figure and usually involves specific verses calling upon the spirit to leave in the name of a higher power. In Christian exorcisms, these exorcists call upon God, Jesus, the saints, and often various angels to assist them in the expulsion of the demon. Possessed individuals are not considered to be evil themselves, but rather unwilling victims playing host to a malicious entity. These victims aren't considered responsible for their actions, and the exorcism is considered a remedy rather than a personal punishment. The possessed can often display signs of violence and aggression, and are often restrained during the exorcism in an effort to protect both the priest and the possessed. Christian exorcisms had declined greatly in America by the 1800s, and it was only when popular culture began to explore the idea that the rate of exorcisms increased dramatically. Possession, however widespread and established as a phenomenon, is not considered to be a valid condition by the scientific community. Science points to a similarity between the symptoms of possession and symptoms of accepted physical and psychological conditions such as psychosis, epilepsy, Tourette's syndrome, and schizophrenia. Despite this skepticism, the phenomenon and the rituals that surround it continue to provoke debate.
The Roman Catholic Church, before being appointed by an exorcist, you need to speak with a priest, and then if this priest thinks that it could be a case, there is a proper committee that investigate on your case to recognize if there is any other explanation. And for other explanation, we are usually thinking about a psychological or even worse, a psychiatric condition. This committee is made with a priest, of course, but also with medical doctors and psychiatrists that can understand if there is any other issues. No people with medical issues and medical conditions that can be clearly identified by a medical doctor are moved to the exorcists.
So horrible, scary footage of a guy being exorcised, throwing himself around on a bed. The sort of that thing of the back arched, and we took it to a doctor who specialised in epilepsy and epileptic fits, because we knew this guy had no history of epilepsy, and he said it was a pseudo-epileptic fit. There was a whole type of fitting that is stress-related. Normally it's people that have had abuse in their past, and it's a cry for help, and it's not a fit in the way that an epileptic will have a fit. It's not created in the same way. It's almost doing what you think a fit is. You could also then see how things like the arching of the back would create a sort of, it looked a bit like he might have levitated. He didn't, he very clearly didn't, but how you might, if you believed that, and you half remembered what you saw, so you get films like The Exorcist that sort of play on that.
There had to be more to this than mental illness or imagined fits. From all sources that we'd spoken to, the general opinion was that nobody from the Roman Catholic Church would speak to us about exorcism.
With their ranks closed, we decided to look further afield. We discovered two figures in America at the forefront of modern-day exorcism.
The first was an ex-New York cop turned demonologist named Ralph Sarchie. His life's work with demons in the church was dramatised in the 2011 film Deliver Us from Evil.
The second was well-known Pentecostal pastor and exorcist Bob Larson. He claims to have exorcised thousands of people during his career and has attracted a loyal following and overt criticism in equal measures. We headed for the airport and flew out to New York. Several key supernatural scenes in Deliver Us from Evil are said to have been lifted directly from Sarchie's memoirs, and we were keen to discuss his first-hand experiences with evil.
It had taken some months to pin Sarchie down. Despite his brushes with Hollywood and TV shows, he remained notoriously reluctant to give interviews. He was still being evasive, but eventually agreed to meet us in his hometown on Long Island.
We left New York behind us, wondering what waited ahead.
The next day, Sarchie picked us up from our hotel and offered to give us a tour of nearby Amityville, scene of the infamous Amityville horror story and grisly the Feo murders.
He talked about his work with the famous supernatural investigators, the Warrens, and some of the cases they'd worked on. Sarchie had picked a large park for the interview, and we made our way there to begin.
Well, I grew up in Queens, Flushing, Queens. I went to parochial school, Catholic school, up to 8th grade. I was an altar boy. So that's about as religious as I was. And when I got involved in the work, I never had any kind of experience growing up as far as seeing a manifestation of any kind of a spirit. I never had any preternatural activity or activity outside the natural order that God instituted, or I didn't recognize it if I did. It wasn't until I got involved with, actually, Ed and Lorraine Warren, I became one of their investigators in the early 90s, working with them, and I worked with Bishop McKenna through the Warrens. Father Martin was another one that I met being involved in this work. So it seemed like all the right people were put in my path to lead me to where I needed to go. You know, I think that being a New York City police officer, I got the trust from the Warrens and Bishop McKenna right away, and Father Martin for that matter. Their whole life serves God. There's nothing else, you know, and you got to be around people like that, because you learn the most from people like that. And if you want to know about the devil, you got to know who God is. We're dealing with different types of spirits that have different powers. The demons come from the 9 choirs of angels, actually, and you know they have different powers. The choir of angels is the lowest choir, so I'm assuming that that's what we mostly deal with. But every once in a while, we get something that we know is not quite right. We're dealing with a devil, and we're not dealing with a demon, you know, and they're powerful. When I'm in a house or during, it doesn't happen really during solemn exorcisms, it happens during homes. I get a sharp pain in the right side of my head. It could either be here or it could be here. It's predominantly here. And it's not a headache, it's almost like, if I could relate, it's not as profound, but maybe somebody put maybe an ice pick. It's centralized, it's very focused, it's a very focused pain. It's different from, you know, like a headache type of thing. Not every one of my cases that comes to me is a genuine case of diabolical activity. I deal with a lot of mentally ill people. They need to be helped. You know, we will not lead a person down a path to believe that they have a problem with the demonic if they don't. I've assisted at about 27, around that number. It wasn't much from the time that I wrote the book as far as dealing with genuine cases of possession. The number could be even more than that. They did a study. I believe they used about 800 cases of demonic possession and oppressions. And they looked for a common denominator between all of those people, or a pattern at least, or a majority, and they couldn't find not one connection. There is no cultural, there is no religion, there is no color of skin, there is no anything. We're the subject of a battle that we can't see. We're the subject of a battle that makes ISIS look like Girl Scouts. Every single person that's been born, every single person that's alive right now, there are two beings that have their complete and total attention. One is God and one is the devil. They're both looking at every single one of us, and they're both fighting for us. But we're the ones that have the say in it. Neither one of them do. It's down to us. It's either you choose to go with God or you choose to go with the devil. And if you don't go with God, you've automatically gone with the devil. The end game of dark forces is to take as many souls away from God as possible. That's the end game. That's the goal.
After the interview, with some persuasion, Sarchie agreed to show us some videos of exorcisms he had attended over the years, but made it clear we would not be able to use or reproduce these videos in any way. He arrived at our hotel room with a laptop and a large number of DVDs. He showed us several sessions, and while each one was disturbing in its own way, most could be explained away by various conditions and medical possibilities. That was, however, until we reached the last video. The subject of the video was a thin adult male being restrained by other men.
As he struggled, he began to drool. As his drool hit his white shirt, it appeared to turn bright red, resembling blood.
He continued to struggle and groan, as if in terrible pain. All at once, he stopped struggling. He blinked in a very exaggerated manner 3 times, and then his eyes stayed open without blinking at all for the remainder of the video. As he stared blankly into the middle distance, the pupils of his eyes appeared to change shape into something very much like a goat's eye.
As the video progressed, the man's skin appeared to blister and bubble, and a cut began to open up on his forehead.
We both found this video very unsettling, and for the first time in years I woke up in the middle of the night, full of fear. My previously airtight atheism had taken a hard knock. If what we saw in this video was real, then maybe I was wrong about everything.
What stuck out about that last video was the fact it was because of the combination of conditions that the guy was exhibiting. You know, if it was just dribbling, you know, the blood, you know, you could say, well, perhaps he bit his cheek and it was just a video that made it look like it was turning to blood. You could say about his eyes not blinking. You know, we looked into that, and it is possible to not blink for up to 30 to 40 minutes, we found out. So the cut opening on his head, maybe had high blood pressure and that was an old cut. Who knows? But I think for me, the thing that made it disturbing was it was a culmination of about 5 or 6 different things that on their own were fairly hard to explain, let alone all happening at once.
Our time in Long Island was drawing to an end. We packed the car and headed towards Baltimore to meet with Bob Larson.
He was due to carry out some exorcism sessions in a church nearby. We were hoping he would allow us to attend and see for ourselves the work that he was doing.
After I became a Christian, my goals, working myself through university with a rock band and being a musician and wanting to go into medicine, changed very dramatically. but I wasn't sure what that was. So I went on a motivational speaking tour and did that for several years. What was interesting is that during that time, people would come to me to talk to me about problems, and demons would speak out of them. For 20 years, I hosted a nationally syndicated radio show. People would call me, and sometimes they would tell me outlandish stories of their worship of the devil, and sometimes these people would actually have demonic voices speak through them over the radio. So I kept this thing going until about 20 years ago. I felt the call. I have to do this full time. Demonic possession occurs as the result of a variety of reasons, but there are, generally speaking, a handful of more common ways. One, hereditary. You inherit the demons, you're born with them. They're in the bloodline. They are there because of evil of prior generations. Secondly, you do evil. That could be almost anything. It could be the occult or witchcraft, it could be Satanism, or it could be as simple as hating someone and wishing them ill, or getting just enough knowledge of witchcraft spells to be dangerous and try to see if they work. It could be as simple as playing with a Ouija board. But there always has to be an open door. The grace of God protects people, even in our ignorance and innocence, from inhabitation of evil. So the devil knows he has to have an open door, a right, and he's always looking for it. I never used to think much about how many exorcisms I've done until the press started asking me, and I had to do some calculating. And I have to keep recalculating because of my busy exorcism schedule, but sometime this last year, it passed 40,000 documented cases.
Reverend Bob agreed to let us attend his exorcism sessions.
Before each session, he would gather notes and go over the case with his team. Each session began with a lengthy discussion with each exorcee. He would discuss mental history, spirituality, and family with each of his clients before moving on to the actual exorcism.
Every time I do an exorcism, I'm in danger. I'm in spiritual danger. I'm in physical danger. And I have been physically injured. Perhaps the worst was getting my ribs broken one time. But I've been scratched and gouged and kicked and bloodied and thrown across the room. I've been knocked down. They've attempted to strangle me, but I've survived pretty well. But from a spiritual standpoint, every demon wishes me ill. I simply have to believe and have confidence that Christ will protect me. If I'm doing His work and I'm doing His calling, it is God's obligation to keep me safe so I can help the people He wants me to help. Go, 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 go with the power of Christ. Go. Get out of her. Go. Go with the power of Christ. Go. Now push it out of you. Push that evil. Push every thought of death out of you now. Go. Go. Spirit of death, go. 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 Now one of you come behind her. The power of Christ. Go.
Loose her.
Go. Go.
Go.
I wish that every exorcism I did was successful. It's not. Sometimes we encounter demons we can't get out. Sometimes I'm absolutely certain a person has demons and I can't get them to speak or display themselves in a way to expel them. Well, ultimately, it's not about me. It's God who is doing the exorcising. I'm just an instrument to enforce God's will, so I have to concede that it may not be God's time yet for that person for some reason, or that individual may not be ready to get rid of their demons. I sometimes say people without realizing it, make friends of their demons. As an exorcist, I spend a lot of time casting out demons, but I also spend at least equal, if not more time, telling people they don't have demons, that they're looking for a magic bullet, a quick fix. They would like to blame their problems on the devil. And even sometimes when people are demonically possessed, not everything they do is demonic. Some of it is just aberrant behavior. It is just plain emotional laziness of not wanting to deal with their problems in a realistic way. But it's pretty clear when it's actually the devil, because the person may act in a way that's contrary to their personal desires and wishes. And that is when you know it's outright absolute possession.
By the blood of
The sword of the Spirit, my
Sit down for a second. I'm gonna feed you. Can't have it. Can't have it. Get up,
Who's there?
Who's there besides Jezebel and witchcraft?
Jesus Christ said in John chapter 10, Satan comes to kill, steal, and destroy. That's about as good a definition of the devil as you're ever going to get. Steal, kill, and destroy. That's what darkness does.
We witnessed 3 sessions, each more unnerving than the last. The strange fluctuations in the behaviour could be interpreted as genuine possession, or maybe just the result of hypnotic suggestion.
The last subject was a middle-aged woman from Canada who alleged terrible abuse at the hands of a stalker from her hometown.
Her story was both distressing and emotionally shattering.
But did it amount to genuine possession?
That was a good confession for you to make that your emotions are in Christ.
He held a knife to my chest. He choked me with lots of head bashing. He broke my teeth with a wrist. He tore off my hair. It's just falling.
Often people think it must be terribly difficult discerning the difference between a psychological or mental problem and demonic possession. Actually, it's very easy. If you understand the various forms of mental illness and how they exhibit themselves and the way that they're expressed through verbalization, generally speaking, a few well-placed questions will tell you.
Now in the final session, things were about to take a dramatic turn.
I speak the healing in Christ, her fear. Lord, reach inside her and take that unnatural, demonic fear out of her.
No! No! Yeah! Yeah! Yeah!
So without any right.
Without any right!
To this woman.
To this
go.
I have to go.
Take my demons.
I take my demons
Judge my God.
to be judged by God.
Get out.
Ah!
Go. Go.
Yeah!
Get out.
Yeah! Yeah!
Go.
Yeah!
Go.
Yeah! Ah!
Get out of here.
Yeah!
Go, monster.
Yeah!
Get out of here.
Yeah! 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 Yeah!
Go with Jesus. Get out. All of you go. Go, Spirit. Come out. Come out.
The devil wants to bring suffering, misery, pain, death, destruction to all humanity in every way that he can.
At the end of the session, we offered to give the woman a lift back to her hotel. After such trauma, we expected her to be withdrawn and melancholic.
Bizarrely, she was light-hearted and happy. But is this really the result of a demon expulsion, or just an indication of a very strange, yet effective therapy session?
Our stateside journey was over, and we headed back to New York. We'd seen some very strange things on our trip, but as we got on the plane, I had to wonder if it was actual proof, or just a murky sideshow.
With Reverend Bob Larson sessions, I did find them very affecting and quite emotional in a lot of places. I don't know if that adds up to a genuine demonic or supernatural experience. For me, the energy in the room created by, you know, the person who was possessed, and also Bob Larson and the people he had around him, kind of created this atmosphere that did feel like it was kind of supernatural. And what happened to the people in, you know, the possessed people in the sessions was also very strange to witness. But I didn't really see anything physically manifest that I couldn't explain away as, you know, somebody being in a trance or being open to suggestion, or just simple, bizarre, but simple role play.
Think about the first girl who was exorcised. Her mother didn't even tell her that she was coming to an exorcism session. So she came in, saw everyone, saw us, did not know what was happening. And even after this, something happened then and there. So whatever happened, something changed that person. Something happened. And with the last exorcism, with that poor woman who really broke my heart, when she looked at me, I could see it wasn't her. When I say it wasn't her that I met initially. She wasn't in that same state of mind, whatever you want to call it, but it wasn't right.
Back in the UK, we received some very welcome but unexpected news.
Hi.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. What's going on?
So, do you remember I told you that no one from the Roman Catholic Church accepted to speak with us?
Yeah.
Guess what?
You found somebody?
Yeah.
So I won't give you all the details now, but I've found an exorcist, a Roman Catholic exorcist, who is willing to give us an interview.
Amazing.
I know, great news, huh? I'll tell you all about it when you get back, yeah?
Once again, we headed back to the airport, bound for Bologna.
The priest in question was Father François d'Armine, originally from Canada, but now living in Ancona, Italy.
His career in exorcism spanned 2 decades, and we were eager to talk to him about his life and battles with the dark side.
Sono esorcista da praticamente più di 22 anni, per l'esattezza, 1944. E quando sono ritornato ho ricominciato a pregare e mentre pregavo però dicevo al Signore: tu mi puoi chiedere tutto tranne che diventare sacerdote. Ecco. Però lui ha vinto le mie resistenze, non ho mai avuto ovviamente ripensamenti, non mi sono mai rincresciuto di questa mia decisione. E sono diventato sacerdote nel 1979 e sono stato ordinato dal Papa Giovanni Paolo II, ecco allora. E le circostanze che mi hanno portato ad accettare la richiesta del Vescovo di diventare esorcista ufficiale della diocesi sono abbastanza, per me, costituiscono un segno della volontà di Dio e di fronte a questo segno io non ho potuto dire di no. Quindi io ho cominciato a fare l'esorcista, il mio primo esorcismo nel 1994 con un caso di possessione. Abitualmente l'esorcista riceve tante persone che subiscono altre forme di attacchi da parte del demonio. O meglio, si dovrebbe precisare che l'esorcista riceve tante persone che pensano di essere disturbate in modo straordinario dal demonio, ma che non lo sono. Queste persone hanno bisogno di essere ascoltate, di essere aiutate, di essere rassicurate e di essere avviate anche in un percorso cristiano anche di conversione. Per esempio ci sono delle persone che cominciano ad accusare dei dolori molto forti, che tra l'altro magari cambiano posto, no? E queste persone vanno dal medico come devono fare, anzi se non ci sono andati siamo noi che li mandiamo dal medico, noi esorcisti. È una delle prime condizioni, quando una persona ci racconta queste cose diciamo: ma voi siete andati dal medico? Devo dire che anche qualche medico manda i suoi pazienti in certi casi dall'esorcista, con molta discrezione ovviamente. Che si presentano dall'esorcista, ci sono delle persone che avevano perso la fede o che non erano credenti ma che trovandosi confrontate a fatti inspiegabili tentano anche la strada della Chiesa e dell'esorcismo, eccetera, no? E si rivolgono quindi a un esorcista, a un sacerdote. Questo può capitare, perché effettivamente queste persone sono confrontate a circostanze che non si spiegano. Per esempio nel caso delle vessazioni ci sono delle persone alle quali non va mai nulla bene. Che non è necessariamente riservato ai casi di possessione, ma può essere anche utilizzato per i casi di gravi ossessioni o vessazioni. Anche la possessione ha le sue manifestazioni e i suoi sintomi abitualmente. Generalmente queste possessioni comportano prima di tutto una avversione al sacro. Le persone entrando in chiesa magari non riescono ad entrare in una chiesa e se entrano in una chiesa si sentono molto 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 a disagio, si sentono male, ecco, in chiesa. Un altro sintomo è che molte di queste persone cominciano a fare una cosa che magari non hanno mai fatto in vita loro, cioè bestemmiare. Bestemmiano molto, ecco, possono bestemmiare, e questo ovviamente, per questo si può trovare una spiegazione psicologica, bisogna indagare, cercare di capire, eccetera. Può essere un momento di tensione che attraversa questa persona, di grande stress, ecco, di grande angoscia, che si traduce attraverso delle bestemmie praticamente. Comunque ci sono anche queste. Poi ci sono dei fenomeni anche di grande forza. Per questo che per certi casi, io l'ultimo molto importante di cui mi sono occupato, avevo bisogno di una decina di persone, ecco, per seguire la vittima, perché questa persona aveva una forza incredibile e riusciva a svincolarsi anche da chi lo teneva, per cui ci doveva sempre essere qualcun altro vicino per saltargli addosso e riprendersi un braccio che era sfuggito, ecco, alla presa degli assistenti, insomma. Quindi una grande forza. Mi ricordo in particolare il caso, ecco, di una persona al quale il demonio faceva girare la testa in senso anti-orario. E qualcuno si è preoccupato, ma non si farà male al collo così? Quando è rientrato in sé, questa persona non sentiva assolutamente nulla al collo. Poi ci sono anche dei fenomeni, altri fenomeni paranormali ancora più evidenti, cioè quando la persona comincia, sempre in trance, con una voce alterata, a dire delle cose che non può assolutamente sapere. Poi possono capitare dei fenomeni di materializzazione, di oggetti che possono essere di vario tipo, che molto spesso escono fuori dalla bocca della vittima, oppure che la vittima trova per terra. Invece gli oggetti che si materializzano uscendo dalla bocca ovviamente non vengono dallo stomaco, anche perché talvolta possono vomitare letteralmente dei pezzi di vetro e non potrebbero provenire dallo stomaco. Poi da sacerdote cattolico mi trovo a usare il rituale che è stato pubblicato in Vaticano nel 1998 con delle ulteriori edizioni. Se però è vero che durante gli esorcismi non ho mai subito dei grossi attacchi, ecco, da parte del demonio, mi è capitato fuori dall'esorcismo di correre certi pericoli. Posso citarne uno molto preciso. Una volta esorcizzo una persona posseduta che, cambiando voce, mi dice, perché a questa persona avevo detto, non avrei dovuto dirlo, che dovevo prendere la macchina e andare in una città, a Bologna, ecco. E allora questa persona va in trance durante l'esorcismo e mi dice: tu andrai a sbattere. Così mi disse. Io non ne ho tenuto conto, anche perché sono certo che il demonio fa tante minacce, però non è libero di fare quello che vuole fare. E effettivamente ho preso la macchina e sono andato per andare a Bologna, qui, e sull'autostrada a un certo momento dovevo sorpassare dei tir, ecco, ne avevo uno a destra e uno davanti a me, ho voluto mettermi sulla terza corsia, ovviamente prima di effettuare il sorpasso. Ho guardato con molta cautela, ecco, gli specchietti e non c'era nessuna macchina nella terza corsia, per cui ho abbozzato il sorpasso, ma proprio mentre lo abbozzavo suona il telefonino nella mia macchina, ovviamente non lo prendo perché stavo poi guidando, e abbozzo il sorpasso e proprio in quel momento arriva una macchina a velocità incredibile sulla terza corsia che mi sorpassa. E io ho fatto un gesto, ma ho sentito letteralmente la mia macchina che, come se qualcuno l'avesse presa e rimessa sulla seconda corsia. No? E poi mi sono reso conto che questa telefonata era di quella persona che mi aveva detto che sarei andato a sbattere. Ma non finisce lì. Ritorno da questa persona qualche giorno dopo, di nuovo durante l'esorcismo, va in trance e mi dice: allora ti è arrivata la telefonata? E come mai non sei andato a sbattere? Quindi certi pericoli ci sono, sì. Però, ripeto, io mi sento tranquillo perché, anche se prego molto, soprattutto quando guido, ma sono molto tranquillo perché so di essere nelle mani di Dio.
Next time on Secrets of the Paranormal World.
I believe that many hauntings are absolutely genuine.
It's an extraordinary claim, and extraordinary claims need extraordinary proof.
Previously on Secrets of the Paranormal World.
We're the subject of a battle that we can't see.
It looked a bit like he might have levitated. He didn't. He very clearly didn't.
The devil wants to bring suffering to all humanity.
One of the earliest recorded references to a singular embodiment of evil or a devil occurs in Zoroastrianism, an ancient Persian religion dating back to before the 6th century BCE. In the Judeo-Christian Old Testament, there is no definitive reference to the devil. The serpent in Genesis that tempts Eve is often assumed to be the devil, and references to Ha-Satan in Chronicles and Job are translated from the Hebrew as adversary or prosecutor. In Christianity, Satan or Lucifer is considered by some to be an angel cast out of heaven. In the New Testament, the Book of Revelations identifies the devil as the dragon and more tellingly as the old serpent, giving rise to the belief by many that the serpent in the Garden of Eden is indeed the devil incarnate. In Islam, the devil is referred to as Iblis or Shaitan. According to the Quran, God created Iblis along with the other demons or jinn out of the smokeless fire. From beginnings nearly as old as man himself, the idea of a devil has carved its place in the collective conscience and continues to lurk in the darkness.
If we think about religious system around the world and across centuries, basically all of them talk about a evil side. Maybe they call them demons, they call them devil, they call Satan, they call karma. They can call in any way, but there is always a black and a white side. Maybe we have a more important and power good side, white side, if we want to say in this way, but there is always a sort of dichotomy, a sort of two sides. If we look about the Jewish religion, we found references to the devil, or at least to evil spirits. If we look also the Holy Quran, the second surah start to talk about the hell and the evils, maybe in a bit different way than in the Christian religions, but all the religions across the centuries have this kind of a double belief.
It's not that surprising, really, that we get similar themes turning up through all human cultures, throughout societies and throughout time as well. We are, after all, human beings. We're working with the same equipment. So there will be fairies and fairy equivalents all throughout time and all throughout geography. Same with demons, same with gods. But we're using the same equipment. It's not surprising that the same themes come up again and again.
The Ouija, or spirit board, is a flat board marked with the letters of the alphabet. The numbers 0 to 9, the words yes, no, and goodbye. In addition to the board, a movable heart-shaped pointer or planchette is used to move around the board, pointing at the letters to spell out words. The spirit board has its origins in the late 1800s in America, where spiritualist camps in Ohio used it to commune with the spirits of the dead. Soon after this, Baltimore businessman Elijah Bond gained patents for a spirit board, and the Ouija board was born. Bond assigned the patent to the Kennard Novelty Company, and they produced and distributed the board in the US as a novelty parlor game. The board wasn't associated with the occult at this point, and only began to gather notoriety when the Illinois spiritualist Pearl Curran began using it to communicate with the dead and published her findings. In the years that followed, the Ouija was treated with fear and skepticism by religious communities who warned of the dangers of possession. The board's creator, Elijah Bond, died in 1921 and was buried in Maryland. His grave was unmarked for many years, until a Robert Murch discovered it in Green Mount Cemetery. Mr. Murch campaigned and eventually gained permission to have a stone Ouija board installed as Bond's final gravestone.
Despite being warned against it, we decided the best way to start looking into the spirit board phenomena was to buy one. We quickly realised that there was a huge online market for the boards. So after a little browsing, we went ahead and bought one. The board arrived about a week later, and we immediately started to use it.
We read through the generally accepted rules, which are reading a prayer before the session, never play alone, and always say goodbye when closing the session.
We tried it multiple times, asking different questions, using different planchettes, but still nothing happened. We decided to move the test to a more controlled environment and enlisted some help. The planchette moved this time, but failed to spell out anything coherent. In search of more experienced board users, we tracked down a group and arranged to meet up. We drove to Leicester and met the group in the basement of an old public house.
On this occasion, the planchette moved and appeared to channel a man named Peter. Although we saw the planchette moving on several occasions, something still didn't sit right. So we decided to talk to somebody with a more scientific approach.
I think it's a really, really interesting social psychological phenomenon, but I think it's better explained in terms of something called the ideomotor effect. And the ideomotor effect is basically non-conscious muscular movements. The people who have their finger on the glass, although each one of them feels, I'm not pushing it, in actual fact they are between them pushing it. And you can imagine the situation that once it starts to spell out a name, suppose you say, well, who is this? And it spells out M-I, then everybody's thinking, who am I? Michael, yeah, C-H, and it carries on.
We took the decision to not incorporate Ouija boards into our investigations because we had two quite scary experiences, and I had been warned prior to using a Ouija board not to use one, because the belief is that they can open a doorway to something that may not be so easy to send back.
We decided to give it one more try. Oversley Woods are located near a historic courthouse and jail.
Criminals who were tried and found guilty were subsequently hung from an oak tree at a crossroads nearby.
If we were ever to contact the spirit world, this seemed like the ideal setup.
Is anybody there? If there are any spirits that'd like to come forward and communicate with us, use our board, use our energy, communicate with us.
But it seemed like the spirits were still unwilling to talk to us.
We've had zero success so far with any kind of Ouija board experience when we've been doing it on our own. I've tried it on my own as well, and it's not worked at all. So that kind of leads me to believe that the idiometer effect is what's going on with most of these people who claim to have had, some kind of supernatural experience. So it's not, the devil or demons or spirits moving that planchette. It's them unconsciously. And because it's unconscious, they might begin to believe that it's not them and it is, in fact, a demon or the devil or spirits. And then I can see how that can become very compelling. But as far as I'm concerned, it's just nothing more than them moving it around themselves.
If it didn't work, how come it's been around for such a long time? The Catholic Church says they're dangerous, and they ban people from using it, or they say it's an open door for evil spirits to come through. We have seen it move. The only time I would say when I saw it move and I knew it wasn't a third party, a spirit or something else, was in the White Room, because I could feel someone pushing it.
You see how, certainly as a hypnotist, you understand how people take ideas and really sort of take things on board, how easily we are influenced all the time by these things that go on around us constantly. And as a magician, you learn, again, how that can be manipulated. You realise very quickly how psychics and charlatans can trick you, but also how you can trick yourself, how a perfectly sincere person might come to believe that they have abilities that they really don't. The burden of proof remains with the people that are making the claims. So again, if you're making an extraordinary claim, you've got to come up with some pretty strong evidence to back that up. So that's where the burden of proof lies. So it isn't up to scientists to disprove those things. It's up to those people to come up with compelling enough evidence. And in the history of these things existing, which is forever, they've never been able to do that. So it's a perfectly sensible response to go, well, okay, well then I don't believe in it. And I more than most people have seen how those things can be fabricated or how we can fool ourselves into believing them. So it seems a sensible, informed judgment to go, well, no, I don't believe in anything like that.
Amongst the psychic community, there are widely considered to be two different and distinct kinds of hauntings. The first is known as residual haunting and usually takes the form of a ghost that continually repeats an event or time frame. These hauntings can also be known as place memories and appear to make up a large proportion of documented hauntings. These ghosts are considered to be a residual energy, like a visual or auditory memory that remains in a fixed location and reenacts an event over and over. The second type of hauntings are known as intelligent hauntings. This type of entity is more often referred to as a spirit and is said to exhibit some awareness of its surroundings and will often interact with the living. These interactions can include moving objects around, writing on mirrors, making sounds, and slamming doors.
Your spirit leaves your body and goes elsewhere. I don't know where it goes. Let's call it another dimension. I believe in heaven. Maybe it goes to heaven. Wherever it goes, many spirits, many human beings and animals, children, want to come back. And somehow, through powers of, I don't know, but through certain energies of the universe and beyond, they're able to come back. Therefore, some hauntings are real. That's it. Many of them are hoaxes and fakes. But I believe that many hauntings and ghosts are absolutely genuine.
I think sometimes spirits may find themselves in limbo, sort of in a place between this world and the next, and they need help to cross over. In other instances, it could be a case of feeling such a strong emotional connection to a place or to an item that they simply don't want to cross over, they choose to remain here. First of all, when we go to someone's home, the processes we would go through when we're looking to establish if there's anything paranormal going on is exactly the same as any paranormal investigator would if they were experiencing what they suspected to be a spirit in the house. So we'll walk around the house, we'll take an EMF meter with us, we'll be looking for changes. There we'll take temperature readings, we'll use digital recorders to try and capture EVPs possibly. If we gather enough evidence and we're kind of 50-50 that yeah, there's something going on here and they strongly believe it's to do with a doll or an object, we'll bring the object back, and once we're working with it, we'll set up very similar experiments really. We'll do trigger object experiments. We'll try and isolate the doll or the object as much as we can. We'll try and control the conditions. We'll set up night vision cameras, motion detectors. If we capture one piece of evidence, we like to be able to back that up with another. I'm also open to more spiritual types of communication. So we'll use a pendulum, we'll bring in psychic mediums, or we'll hold group seances.
As we were leaving, we asked Jane if she had a haunted object that we could take away.
She had a doll that she agreed to let us take, but said that she wouldn't give us any details of its history, so any experiences we had would be unbiased.
We took the doll home, but neither of us could feel anything around it. Eventually, one of our crew picked up the doll and came out with an interesting story.
It was a lady that owned the doll. I say lady, a young lady. I wouldn't say a girl as such, more of a young lady. there's incredible sadness, and I would say certainly depression that's connected to the young lady that owned the doll. That there's definitely a connection to her losing the child. The feeling I've got is postnatal depression. She definitely feels alone, really feels really alone. I don't know whether the child came as a product of this, but I certainly feel that she was abused. She was definitely raped, and I think to me it feels somebody very close to her. I would say her uncle. The word I've just heard is uncle. I just know that whether that's right or not, I just know that it's somebody very close to her that has been systematically abusing her for a long time. And she just, I think, losing the child, she just couldn't cope. I definitely feel that she's committed suicide. I suppose the age of the doll kind of gives it away, doesn't it? But I wouldn't say that this is like decades and decades ago. 60s, 70s. There's drowning. I really feel there's a drowning. I don't know whether that's the way she's killed herself, but I feel that there's definitely some type of drowning that's happened.
We thought it'd be a good idea to talk to Jane to see if the story had any elements of truth about it.
We were told that Holly took her own life when she was about 17. That she picked up on an abusive home life, and that Polly was possibly raped by a relative.
Wow, okay.
So that's really quite, wow, incredible. She said that she felt a lot of sadness, a lot of loss as soon as she was holding the doll. She gave us the year of 1971 as a year that possibly Polly had taken her own life. But what's interesting is the connection. You say postnatal depression, because we were told that Polly had taken her own life because she'd lost a child.
Oh, right.
So that again, that's really interesting. And when we always try to find out if there is some kind of spirit connected to a place or an object, how they died, and we were told that the spirit connected to that particular doll died either drowned, was hung, or some form of suffocation, because when they held the doll, they had trouble breathing, felt very panicked, and like they were suffocating. So drowning came up, actually.
When it comes to paranormal experiences, typically you're not actually doubting the experience, it's the interpretation of the experience that's up for debate. And so I have personally had experiences that I think if I was a believer, I would think were genuinely paranormal. But as I'm not, I have other alternative explanations, I don't go for those paranormal explanations. So just to give you one example, one of the things that we're particularly interested in is a phenomenon known as sleep paralysis, and it can involve all kinds of weird hallucinatory aspects. But in its most basic form, it's when you're kind of half awake, half asleep, and you realise you can't move. You often have a very strong sense of presence. You may see someone standing in the bedroom, and you kind of, after a few seconds, it disappears and you wake up properly and it's gone. So I've had those kinds of experiences. Now, if I was a believer in the paranormal, I may well think I'd seen a ghost, but I'm not, and I know all about sleep paralysis, and I'm quite happy with that as an explanation for what I experienced.
I would be very interested to see a lot of resources, and it's happening, being put into anomalistic psychology. It's a relatively new kind of field of psychology. Before, the study of the paranormal tended to centre on the events themselves to see whether or not they were actually veridically true. But anomalous psychology looks at us, and it sees, it studies the kind of systematic mistakes that we can make in our cognition, which will allow perfectly sane, perfectly normal people to see things that aren't there, or to fervently believe in things that aren't there.
Eager to experience some paranormal activity ourselves, we did some research and found a house in Hull, purported to be the most haunted house in the UK.
We found the owner and booked ourselves in for an overnight stay at the derelict property. I think it's going to be one of two things. I think either nothing's going to happen at all, or they've got some system, or they pay some person to kind of knock on walls, or...
No, but that'd be terrible as well, but that would scare the heck out of me as well.
Newspapers have reported sightings of faces in the windows of the empty house, and the owner had been unable to rent the property to any tenants.
The last people to rent the property had lasted just a few nights before fleeing. We met the property owner, Andy, about 7 p.m, and he let us into the house. He detailed his experiences of the property, moving objects, strange sounds, and footsteps.
He also told us some of its history, that it had been used as a foster home for terminally ill children, and he went on to outline alleged abuse and deaths that had occurred there involving these children.
He also told us the story of the last people to rent the house some years previously. They had in fact not even lasted one night before being driven out by the malevolent spirits.
Before he went, he told us about a story that had made it into the national press.
One night, about 5 or 6 houses across there, all the residents all came out, one person came out and was looking in the windows, and we said we could see a couple of young girls looking at the upstairs window. And we knew it was an empty house because we knew I hadn't lived in it for years. And then one of the other neighbours came out and said, "Well, what's going on?" And we said, "I've seen some kids up there." And they saw them as well, and in the end about 3 or 4 different people all rang the police and said that some kids was an empty house where we lived. So the police came, and that's why the front door's all smashed the front door in. Came in and looked all around the house, couldn't find anybody in the place. And then we got a locksmith out and he put a couple of big nails into the door frame to hold the door shut. And I think one of them said there was one of the windows was misted up, and then somebody went like that, and the hand on the window left it like on the condensation, left like a handprint on it.
We'd packed the spirit board and decided that approaching midnight was the right time to set it up.
So, if we do have any spirits among us, please come ahead and speak to us.
Are there any spirits here? Are there any spirits here?
Are there any spirits in here? If you are with us, please give us a sign. Are you pushing?
No.
Are there any spirits with us? You pushed her.
I didn't push, but I think you probably did.
Are there any spirits here with us?
Once again, if there were any spirits, they remained quiet.
After exploring the house and becoming increasingly uneasy, we decided to haul ourselves up in one of the downstairs rooms and monitor the closed-circuit camera system.
The whole house was barely above freezing, so we wrapped up and waited for something to happen. As it turns out, waiting for ghosts in a near-freezing derelict house is not conducive to getting a good night's sleep.
We left De Grey Street no closer to any kind of proof.
I think De Grey Street was interesting for a number of reasons. I don't think one of those was that it was haunted. I think it was almost an experience in being conditioned. So you turn up to this house and it's close to freezing. We already know the stories surrounding it. And when we get there, the guy who owns it tells us a bunch of more stories that are all in their own way, quite disturbing and nasty. And then he leaves, leaving us alone in a cold, damp, deteriorating building. During the middle of the night, I did hear things. I did hear knocking, and I did hear scratching, but I realised the next morning, as I was locking up the gate on the way out, I banged the gate, and about 3 or 4 pigeons panicked and came out of a roof void space in the house, which suddenly made me realise that all that knocking and scratching was probably just a couple of pigeons.
Our night at De Grey Street was quite an experience. I'm not sure if I would call it a good one, but it was a very damp, cold, horrible experience. And knowing, of course, you go in there knowing that it's the most haunted place, lots of news about it, and me being a believer, I researched if there was any scam news, and I couldn't find anything online, which even made me be more on edge than anything. And going there, and as you explained, when Andy comes in, he told us all kinds of horrible stories. But he also said the locals said that they'd seen little girls looking out of the window. And the police knew the house was empty. So they initially thought it was an emergency, broke down the door, got in there and realised no one's there. Now, this is quite scary. I mean, this could be a collective hysteria where everyone knows the house is haunted, so they think they see something, but this incident happening more than many times suggests to me that there is something happening.
We don't see the world as it really is. Cognitive psychology in general has done so much for us to explain to us that we see the world as it's useful to see it. I can't see everything around me, even though I'm under the impression that I can. There'll be bits sort of blocked out to one side. I'll be over perceptive with patterns. I expect to see faces all over the place. I will be prone to using top-down cognition, which means that I'll tend to interpret things in the light of what I already believe. So if I already believe in ghosts, if something's peculiar, I'll be more likely to interpret it that it's a ghost. There are so many reasons how we can act as perfectly normal, well-adapted biological beings and see things that aren't there.
It's actually very interesting to look at what creates paranormal experiences in people. It's fascinating. And sometimes it's really unexpected. Like there were cases where they realised that there was a window that was left open, so wind was coming through at a particular frequency, or an extractor fan that was a particular frequency of air going through it, or things like that create, in the same way that, you know, sort of brown noise and a white noise can create things that vibrate different parts of our body. So a certain frequency of noise, or very bass noise, will make you feel sick. That this particular frequency was people that lived in this house. It was vibrating the eyeballs in the sockets, and you wouldn't be aware of it. But what you are aware of is black shapes in the corner of your eye that when you turn and look, they're gone. I mean, that's a fascinating thing. You'd never, doesn't matter how skeptical you are of ghosts, you'd never think that unless it was properly investigated.
I would dare to say, a lot of people won't like me for this, that 95% of it is mumbo jumbo. It's rubbish and nonsense, and a lot of gullible people are being misled. But there's always that 5% that certain people can contact the other side.
Through one of our contacts, we discovered a tunnel complex in the Worcestershire countryside, rumoured to be haunted. This network of tunnels and rooms had been carved out of the bedrock of a large hill and had been used as a factory and more recently as a civil defence shelter. Now, it was mostly rented by paranormal groups, convinced of some kind of supernatural infestation. We took along well-known psychic Ralph Keaton to talk to us about his work in the paranormal field and to see if he could sense any presence in the tunnels.
I can understand why there's a lot of reluctance to believe in something you can't touch, sense or feel. Plus, we're taught a lot of things in school, like physics, the law of things, and you're taught out of it. We're taught about fantasy, and yet when we get older, we're taught out of it. So I find it strange that if people don't believe, you did as a child. What happens with me when I'm doing mediumship, I'll feel and sense. And in fact, people can actually say that my persona changes depending on how I'm dealing with stuff. There has to be one house in particular that is in Yorkshire that I went to as a younger gentleman. I was very cocksure of myself, really, and I kind of knew where I was going. And as soon as I walked into the property, I got thumped in the chest, thrown backwards and chucked out of the house by the energy I was about to deal with. But that was a slap in the face for me. It taught me to be respectful. Probably the more famous of the houses that I've ever dealt with is the one that everybody knows is the film, the Monster House film. And for that one, we had to basically clear the family out and start from scratch again in there, because that was very dramatic. But for me, I can sense the energy of it. So depending on how strong it is, depending on whether it's large or small, whether it's a weighty feeling or anything, you'll deal with it as it is. As people already know, my hands go freezing, and that's because they draw the energy up. But I think that's because they hold on to me, and that's how I get the passage of spirit energy. A spirit can be malevolent in different ways. They can be very angry because we've caused a problem. In other words, we've moved into their property and they don't like us. Or we've been derogatory towards them, we've said something bad about them. Or, as I like to say to everybody, in life as in spirit, we're the same. So if a person in life was grumpy and horrible, they're going to be exactly the same in spirit. They don't become angelic, they are as they are. So we can sometimes misinterpret a malevolent spirit from just being somebody who's having a bad time. Some of the darkest experience I've had is what I call end of life. It's where people I've seen people that are on the cusp of passing themselves, and that's where we get some real experiences, because that's where the spirit world and this world unite, and it can be quite dramatic. I've honestly found that the afterlife, or the spiritual life, if you want to call it that, we're dealing with energy, so we're dealing with a form that's freer than we are, and has that ability to be able to do a lot more. We restrict ourselves because we physically restrict ourselves, but spiritually they don't. So they can do a lot more. They're a bit more powerful than we are.
A About halfway through the interview, Ralph stopped and began to feel a presence.
We've got a child here.
Really?
Yeah. And I can sense it, and it's a girl. Hello?
Strangely, our dog, who'd accompanied us on the shoot, began to shiver and shake.
You hear her? She's coming closer. Can you hear the voices?
After a short while, Ralph turned his focus on us.
You don't own an old car, do you?
In fact, we own two.
Was it a creamy colour or a lightish colour?
One of which was a light blue Citroen DS.
There's somebody here that knows the two of you. They're giving me images of you two.
The only person we could think of that could possibly be in the spirit world was my late mother.
There's a lady with me. Or I should say with you. And I would say a tall lady as well. Very long flowing.
My mother had been about 5'4", not exactly tall.
In a white house. It's painted white.
The house my parents had owned, and indeed the house I did a lot of my growing up in, was painted white. But then aren't a lot of houses painted white.
From my sensations of it, it's always hard to pick an age when you're dealing with this sort of thing, but she's 60, 70, somewhere in there.
My mother had died at 67.
This lady passed very suddenly, very quickly.
And she died after a short illness.
Actually, I want to talk about a gentleman's ring. She was showing me a gentleman's ring. But it would be quite a chunky thing.
Some years before she died, my mother gave me my grandfather's wedding ring, the only real piece of jewellery I own to this day. Despite this impressive hit rate of correlation, it was by no means conclusive.
If you imagine you buy a pack of tarot cards, you follow the thing in the book and you do it on a friend, and naturally you're going to make the sorts of statements that people will make fit, and the friend is taken aback at how effective that is, and then you go, oh, maybe I'm quite good at this, and you do it again. Then you don't worry about the book and you just start to rely on your sort of intuition, and again people are telling you that you're very special, that you have this gift, they're amazed by it, they can't explain it. You'd be hard pushed not to let that make you feel like, you really are a bit special, and what a lovely feeling to have. So that can be taken to the nth degree, and then if you start to become very successful at a commercial product, you have to start using tricks to kind of keep that going. So I think you can still use the tricks, and I think a certain cognitive dissonance can occur where you're cheating here, but that's just something that you do, but in reality it's still real. I think we are very good at justifying things to ourselves.
I think that if we look to evolutionary psychology, we can find some clues as to why it is that we appear to have a kind of predisposition to go for certain types of beliefs. So beliefs in the supernatural, where do they come from? Well, one of the reasons we are so successful as a species is because we are very good at picking up at patterns and regularities in our environment around us, making connections between things, cause and effect relationships, and so on and so forth. There is a price that we pay for that, though, insofar as sometimes we make connections that aren't really there, and sometimes we see patterns that aren't really there. And when you think about this from an evolutionary perspective, it looks like we have more of a tendency to pick up on patterns and make connections that aren't really there, rather than making the opposite error, which would be to miss patterns and connections that are really there. What we find is that on the one hand, we've got the very, very big claims that are made, particularly by people who claim that they themselves have psychic ability. They'll make claims, for example, that in terms of telepathy or precognition and so on and so forth, that they are 100% accurate. Well, if they were, it would be just so easy to demonstrate that. We would not be arguing about it now. It would be beyond doubt. But what we find is that when we test those people under properly controlled conditions, they can't deliver the goods. And for me, that makes it an interesting question of, well, why do people think that they have these powers? What's going on in terms of the psychology of the situation? But there isn't a single paranormal phenomenon that is reliable and robust and replicable. If they get one, then that would be the kind of thing that would convince me that maybe paranormal forces really do exist, but we're nowhere near that.
Next time on Secrets of the Paranormal World.
Psychic energy is built into our chromosome system. It's embedded in our DNA.
Take out the nothing, the entire mass of humanity would fit into a sugar cube.
Previously on Secrets of the Paranormal World.
I believe that many hauntings and ghosts are absolutely genuine.
We are very good at justifying things to ourselves.
There are thought to be several types of psychic phenomena. The first is known as telepathy and is often referred to as mind reading or ESP. There are generally regarded to be four main types of telepathy. Latent or deferred telepathy is the transfer of information from the mind of one person to the mind of another. Retrocognitive telepathy is the theory that a person's history and memory can be extracted from one person's mind to another. Emotive telepathy draws on the idea that physical feelings and sensations can be transferred between two individuals. Finally, superconscious telepathy suggests that a collective consciousness can be accessed to gather common ideas. Some people have suggested that this type of hive mind theory is used by social insects. There is still little hard evidence to support the existence of telepathy, although several high-level experiments have been carried out over the years. Whilst there have been isolated incidents of positive results, these often falter under scrutiny and repeat experiments. Another type of psychic phenomena is known as telekinesis or psychokinesis. This theorizes that a person can use their mind to manipulate or move objects or physically influence other people without physical interaction. Clairvoyance is a popular and enduring psychic phenomena. Again, this is the idea that a practitioner can use their mind to collect information remotely, but more often concerning events occurring in the future or far away, and relay this information back to a subject. One skeptic, magician James Randi, has a long-standing offer, now $1 million to anyone who proves a genuine psychic power under proper observing conditions. Thus far, the prize has gone unclaimed.
Now, there are lots of biases in the way that our minds work that we're just not aware of, and these can be exploited to give the impression that people have psychic ability when maybe they don't. So to give you one specific example, if ever I'm doing a talk, I will demonstrate my own psychic abilities by transmitting a thought from my mind into the audience's mind. And I'll say, I'm going to keep it very simple. I'm going to transmit a number between 1 and 10, but not 3 because that's too obvious. So make a mental note, the first one that comes into your head, now. And I can pretty much guarantee that about a third of the audience will go for the number 7. Now, it doesn't matter what I'm thinking of, about a third of the audience will go for the number 7. We're not sure exactly why it happens. We know that people tend to avoid the extremes. People try to go for something they feel is the most random thing that they can come up with, and 7 seems to fit the bill. And also, you've ruled out 3 because you've said explicitly don't go for 3. So you'll reliably get a kind of grouping around the number 7. Not everybody will get it, but around about a third.
Most skeptics will analyse the fact that we trick ourselves. The old scenario of look into a bunch of, I don't know, clouds. Let's see. You look into clouds and you'll see faces, because we train ourselves to see faces. So therefore, your eyes don't work very well at night because of the way that they're organised. So therefore, you're going to see shadows and think it's human form. So skeptics will have an angle on that side of it, which is understandable, which is fine. It's what you can't explain that is where they get stuck.
I didn't have anyone to consult with, but the scientists that tested me, I learned so much from them. From people like Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut who was the 6th man on the moon, he tested me. Dr. Werner von Braun. We're talking about major institutions like Goddard the Space Laboratory, the Lawrence Livermore Radiation Labs where they build nuclear weapons, Stanford Research Institute, which is Stanford University today, Foch Hospital, the Lawrence Livermore, the American Naval Surface Weapons Center. So all these people around the world help me understand what I'm dealing with. I believe that I validated my telekinetic powers at Stanford Research Institute. It was under control condition. The film is there available for you to see on my website. It was cheat-proof conditions. I don't care what other magicians say, that there was this, there was that. Everyone, skeptics will always find a loophole. But PK exists. It's basically unexplored, it's undeveloped in our human mind. I think that in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5,000 years from now, everybody will be able to move objects from one place to the other.
We decided to conduct our own psychic experiment based around the classical Zener card test, designed by psychologist Carl Zener in the early 1930s.
We assembled several test subjects, including believers, non-believers, and those who believe themselves to be psychic. The tester would draw 25 cards. 5 circle cards, 5 star cards, 5 blank cards, 5 triangle cards, and 5 cross cards.
The tester would draw a card and picture it mentally. The subject would then attempt to read the tester's mind and identify the correct card. A subject with no psychic ability would be expected to achieve a 20% success rate when guessing the cards based on the mathematics of probability.
During our test, regardless of belief or ability, all of the subjects achieved between a 15 and 25% success rate, directly in line with random probability.
As far as our tests were concerned, none of the subjects exhibited any measurable psychic ability.
In addition to the Zener tests, we also contacted psychic mediums and conducted a spirit sitting and readings of various photographs.
We wanted to see if any degree of accuracy could be recorded under controlled conditions. However, the results were so wildly inaccurate that we had chosen out of courtesy not to identify the mediums personally.
Over the years, I've visited many psychics and had readings of various kinds. Some seemed highly accurate and some much less so. Back in our hometown, I'd noticed that one such medium had opened up a shop, advertising tarot readings, so I set up our concealed camera and booked a sitting.
Something is going to change very quickly with you, because this is the Wheel of Fortune, and the Wheel of Fortune is indicative of a twist of fate. Something's heading your way, and that will turn everything on its head, and that's what it means, but let's see. And that will bring you to some decision making, as the Page of Wands is all about decisions. This is the start of the decision process, and there might be decisions that you really don't want to make. It's normally battling with illness, battling with pain, and sometimes it could be with business battles. And this will leave you with physical and emotional scars, and it's not over yet.
It was a bit of a weird one as well, obviously, going in, because it wasn't something I wanted to do. I went in to do it for the documentary. So going in with a different frame of mind already puts you in a bit of a different mood. So I think the first thing she said, the card actually I picked was the life card. And she mentioned that someone young in our family will be diagnosed with something that cannot be helped. And at the time I thought, that's a bit weird. I think it's more about, there wasn't anything I wanted to hear in there. So I was quite frustrated, and I think the more frustrated I got, the more she struggled to actually say anything, because I guess people go in there, they so desperately want to hear something that anything they'll say, they'll go yes, yes, where I didn't give any kind of sign of anything she said linked to my life, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's pretty much what she said, and she just babbled on about the same thing and asked me the same question, can I relate to that, can I relate to this? So that's about it really. It wasn't a great experience. So at the time, I went in there with what I wanted to hear, what was important for me. However, the things she did say, out of especially one of them, kind of did come true. She did say that someone young in our family will be diagnosed with something that she can't help, it's life. And Sophia got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, so I guess that could be accurate, or is it a chance? But yeah, so that kind of that did freak me out a tiny bit, yeah. Throughout my life, I've been to many, many, many psychics. Some of them being absolutely brilliant, some of them being really rubbish, and I mean, especially a few have said very accurate things. But again, I'm a woman in my late 20s who is looking to move into a house, get married. So they all said things related to that. I find it quite interesting that they all use similar phrases. They'll never tell you a specific time, date, colour, gender, or anything like that. They'll always say, I want to say, or they'll give you a margin, let's say for an age between 25 and 40 by looking at your age. I don't know, it's almost like a bit of a guesswork where they try to cover every aspect of what they want you to think. It could be quite interesting if we could do a hypercut on every psychic I've been to and cut the words back to back and see how similar they are.
Would you understand with yourself where, and it's not the same reason as this lady, would you understand with yourself where when you become stressed you become a little bit more forgetful? Would you understand where there's times where you need to take a step back? Would you understand where her rings are here with somebody? Now, would you understand a connection to Germany?
I'm
half Turkish, half English. So I've only been living in the UK for the past 6 years now. And I would say the psychics started to get things wrong for me when I moved to this country. In Turkey, there's a certain way your culture, your life develops. So, I don't know, you finish high school, you go to university, you graduate, you're expected to get a job. You get married, you move into a house, you have children. So there's a certain expectancy of your life standard and the way you're going to live. But when I moved to England, it was quite interesting because they have a different way of living or a different culture or a different way they see things. So I found in England, some of the psychics got things quite badly wrong when it comes to cultural things. So I had one psychic telling me that she saw one of my grandparents eating tabbouleh. Now, tabbouleh is not a Turkish dish, but she tried to do a very, very, shall we say, an uneducated guess to see what, in her mind, to what Turkish people ate. Psychics also get things right. Very general things, I would say. Maybe, again, many cultures, even if you don't get a house, you move into a house. As humans, majority of us, I'm not saying all of us, we do want to have a partner, we want to get married, we want to fall in love, we want to have children. So those kind of things they may get right. They told me I was going to get married, move into a house. Yep, it's happened, but doesn't it happen to many of us, really? So there you go, that's really it.
I would make a huge distinction between, on the one hand, paranormal practitioners, whether they be psychics, mediums, astrologers, tarot card readers, alternative medicine, whatever, those who actually believe in the system that they are pushing, on the one hand, which in my experience is most of them, and on the other hand, the deliberate con artists. And there are deliberate con artists out there, there's no doubt about it. There are people who don't believe for 1 minute in whatever it is that they're selling, but they're doing it purely out of profit. And I think morally the two are at kind of opposite poles, obviously. Those who sincerely believe in what they're pushing, they can still unintentionally do a lot of damage. Sometimes they can do some good as well. But the ones at the other end, the ones who are the deliberate con artists who are just exploiting vulnerable people, I mean, they are the ones that I, really have no time for at all, and I would condemn them at every opportunity.
Many people have claimed to possess telekinetic powers, including Russian psychic Nina Kulagina, who was filmed and tested at length by the Russian authorities during the 60s and 70s.
There's something about when you look at that footage, it feels so authentic. And it's easy to forget that all of that footage and all of that research was part of a propaganda war that was going on at the time. So the Russians were investigating and releasing this footage of sort of physical effects, psychokinesis and so on, whereby people like Kulagina could move things and stop. I think she stopped a frog's heart or something at one point. This idea that the Russians might be able to kill you psychically. America, meanwhile, was doing remote viewing and providing its own, sort of counterbalance to that. An interesting thing I heard, which I wonder if it's true, is that the whole idea of remote viewing might have been to cover spies that were out in Moscow, because if you had somebody who was actually in the Moscow office that could report on a document, how do you explain you had that information other than a spy? Well, one way of explaining it is to say that it was done through remote viewing.
Remote viewing is the practice of visualizing and gathering information about a location or other target from a separate location using only the power of the mind. A remote viewer will often use map coordinates or other stimuli to begin their session, usually culminating in a drawing or visual information about a target. The term remote viewing was purportedly coined in the 1970s by Russell Targ and Harold Puthoff, two parapsychology researchers at the Stanford Research Institute. Targ and Puthoff would go on to test many people with suspected psychic ability, including a young Israeli called Uri Geller. As rumors of a well-funded Soviet psychotronic research program began to surface, the Americans followed suit in order to limit any Soviet tactical advantage. Remote viewing was exploited on a multi-agency level in the US between the mid-70s and mid-90s, when it was purportedly shut down due to a lack of reliable results. The most famous of these units was established in 1978 at Fort Meade in Maryland and comprised of only 15 to 20 individuals. It went through many name changes and side projects, eventually being collected together underneath the singular moniker of Project Stargate. After the declassification of the project in the 1990s, many of the key participants, including Ingo Swann and David Morehouse, went on to give interviews, write books, and give lectures on the subject. Ingo Swann often recounted places that he'd viewed remotely, including one underground installation that he claimed was conducting chemical and biological experiments on animals and humans. He divulged this information to his seniors, and it proved to be accurate. According to Swann, the installation was destroyed some years hence. Many long-time remote viewers experienced emotional and mental health issues, which they put down to their prolonged exposure to the paranormal. Despite confirmations that all US remote viewing units have been shut down, there is still a school of opinion that the CIA maintains an RV capability, and academic research on the matter still continues.
Remote viewing would be fantastic, wouldn't it, if you could do it? Can you imagine how potent, how powerful it would be to be used by governments? You know, you could weaponize it. And really, the subject got a far larger profile as a result of Project Stargate, which was the American government looking into the possibility of this. It was closed down in the 1990s because the results were so poor. There really is no evidence, no particularly good evidence to support it.
If this really worked, then obviously it would be an amazing advance in terms of military intelligence and so on. So the question is, well, does it work? Well, having spent $20 million, which sounds like a huge amount of money, but you look at this in terms of the whole overall American defense budget, it's a tiny, tiny, minuscule drop in the ocean, but still a lot of money to most of us, let's face it. What the American government did was to get two people to review the evidence that had come out from the Stargate project. One of them was a woman called Jessica Utz, who is a statistician who is known to be very, very sympathetic towards paranormal claims, and the other one was Ray Hyman, who is an American psychologist who is known to be very, very critical of paranormal claims. And surprise, surprise, they came to two different conclusions. Utz concluded that there was evidence of genuine psychic functioning. Hyman was not convinced by that, but he did say there was some interesting effects in the database that did require taking seriously. The other question they've been asked was, did this have potential as a practical application in intelligence gathering? And really neither of them felt that it did.
During the edit of our documentary, the CIA released a large amount of documents into the public domain, including those that detailed Uri Geller's controlled tests at Stanford. Contained within these documents were telepathic drawing tests. Geller would remain in one location, whilst the tester would produce drawings in another, then placing the drawings in a sealed envelope. Whilst not every drawing is a direct hit, the accuracy displayed is astonishing.
There are remote viewing programs going on as we speak in secret laboratories that belong to defense departments of quite a few countries. Don't believe skeptics who tell you that there's no more psychic programs. Of course there are. I believe that we bring in very powerful, important secret information that technology cannot bring in. It does work. And it just simply went underground. It went deep black. That's all.
I did a a TV bit with a remote viewer called Dr. Carr. It was very interesting. I mean, it's difficult to distinguish remote viewing from, say, telepathy or clairvoyance. It all seems to be pretty much the same thing. But what was fascinating was, here's a guy, he teaches it, he's a big name in that world, so he's a good person to, he's an appropriate person to validate it or otherwise. And in the experiment, we sent somebody out somewhere in London where they would look at something. I didn't know where they were going, so I couldn't in any way influence anything, and he certainly didn't know. And they would stare at something and he would pick up whatever impressions he could. And for an hour and a half, he spoke and threw out whatever impressions he was getting. He wrote over 100 pages of drawings and odd words and things. And after an hour and a half, he stopped it, he was done and exhausted, we all were, and this girl came back, and she'd been looking at the fountain, the horse fountains on Piccadilly Circus, whatever it's called, and of course, with an hour and a half's worth of stuff that he'd said and 100 pages of drawings, there was one that sort of vaguely looked like, I mean, literally just like it could have been a mountain range as well, just that, the four things. He'd mentioned wet 6 times, and he had mentioned fountain once, but he'd also mentioned, I think, church-like and an archway or other things 6 times as well. So it was easy when you try and find a story within that to go, yes, that's kind of sort of successful. The girl was sort of convinced by it. She sort of said 55-60% convinced. But when you actually looked at what had been said, there was nothing. It would have covered any single landmark anywhere in London. And this is, I mean, he was a lovely chap, but, it wasn't convincing. I think he probably did believe in it. If not, he's happy to, put in an hour and a half of just talking nonsense. But yeah, it just really wasn't very convincing. And it's sadly, it's always the same story. This is the thing. It's not only can it never be reproduced under any sort of controlled conditions, but it's just always very disappointing. I have to work so much harder as someone who debunks these things, whether it's remote viewing or mediums. I have to be a lot more convincing than they actually are in real life. Because if you're performing to an audience of believers, if you're in a bit of a closed world, you don't have to do that magician's equivalent of showing there's nothing up your sleeves. You don't have to disprove that you might be cheating. You can just pretty much say anything and rely on people making it fit. And I think remote viewing just seems to fall into that same sort of muddy, foggy trap of that, but it certainly was not a convincing demonstration.
The psychic readings that you had in the studio and in that shop that you went to were all wildly inaccurate, and I think some of the reason for that is the fact that you're talking to British mediums and your upbringing, for your formative years, was not in Britain, so you would miss all of those cultural cues that mediums normally pick up on, like, your granddad used to smoke a pipe, or your grandma used to sew doilies or something like that. That's wholly relevant to somebody living in this country and would have a certain hit rate when they're talking to you. However, if you grew up in Turkey, those things would not be the same. And that's why I think these mediums struggle, because I don't believe that they're in contact with the spirit world. I think they're working off cold reading cues and cultural bias, both of which come under fire when you're talking to somebody who's not from your culture. So you struggle with those cues.
I find it difficult to understand, because that person, I assume the people that we've worked with, they wouldn't be earning a lot of money. They could actually get an everyday job that's much more easier, much more reliable. Why, especially the experience we've had with psychic readings has been so disappointing. I just can't understand it. It's beyond me to understand. I can understand people who really believe in it and they think they're doing good and they're doing someone well. I'm saying it's not right, but I can understand them. But how come
with people who know that they can't do it and they still want to do it. I just can't understand, why would someone want to do that?
Well, imagine that you were doing these cold reading techniques unconsciously, and it didn't really dawn on you that you were deceiving people. So you actually, when you talk to people about the spirits, you are genuinely having some feelings like, and I would say it was imagination, but these things come up like, oh, your grandma used to have a pair of red shoes. Like 1 out of 5 times that might be the case, and the person might go, yeah. So the psychic might then themselves start believing that they do have a genuine psychic power. Then as they go on, these cold reading techniques become more honed in, more sophisticated. So after a number of years, this person almost unconsciously has got extremely good at cold reading people. Doesn't mean they're psychic, and it doesn't mean that they realise they're doing it, but they are.
Nearing the end of our journey, we discovered one more idea that could explain all of the strange phenomena that we investigated, and maybe even redefine our entire existence. This idea, though, has its roots not in the paranormal, but in science. Could the paranormal be nothing more than a glitch in a very complicated system?
Is reality all it seems to be? Is our existence really physical? Or is it, as the simulation hypothesis suggests, an advanced computer simulation of what we perceive as reality? The basic idea points to the rapid growth and acceleration of computing power within our present civilization. In 40 years, we have seen computer games evolve from the very basic Pong to the lush, multifaceted environments of today's games, made possible by hugely more powerful and compact console units. What would have taken a whole room of computer banks to process in 1960 can now be done on a handheld phone hundreds of times over in a fraction of the time. Imagine what could be achieved in 10,000 years. Perhaps, as the theory suggests, a simulation so flawless and comprehensive that we are unable to tell that it is a simulation at all. Now imagine that this progress has already been made, and that our present reality is the result. Could we be nothing more than a very advanced goldfish bowl being observed by unseen creators? From there, you can propose that perhaps these creators are also operating within a simulation. Where does it stop? How long before we create similar environments and artificial intelligences? And when we do, will our observers decide it's time to pull the plug?
One of the age-old arguments that has been stumping quantum physicists and theologians for many years is, do we live in a material-based reality or a non-material-based reality? And this goes back as far as Democritus and Plato, where Plato said, well, no, we don't live in a world made up of small little particles that clump together as molecules and then as material things. That isn't how it happens. We live in a world that is thought-based, essentially pointing towards consciousness as the primary driver of material reality. Now, if you go on the other side of that, and this comes all the way from Democritus through Galileo, through Sir Isaac Newton, everybody is focused in the last, especially the 20th century, on the material-based level of reality. The world is made up of solid objects called atoms. Well, we now know that that isn't true. Every single credible scientist understands that if you try to construct an argument that the world is real, you hit a brick wall. From our perspective, it looks real. Our senses are telling us that, this is real. But if we go in a little closer, we find out it's not. We go in and we see, oh, this is actually skin, and then we go in deep, we find out it's made up of cells. Then we go deeper into the cells and we find out it's made up of billions of tiny little particles. And we go deeper in and then we find out it's at the atomic structure and then the subatomic structure. And if you were to take a mini camera and shrink it down and go flying around the inside of an atom, what would you discover? Nothing. There's actually nothing there. The material base of reality is so small, 99.9 to the power of 6% nothing, energy. In fact, if you were to take all of the human beings on planet Earth and take out the nothing and just reduce it down to the actual physical substance, the entire mass of humanity would fit into a sugar cube. So what are we? Now, is this real? It's real because my senses are telling me it's real? No, not at all. It's real because at the energetic level, something is happening. Now, there's a very good parallel to that we are already aware of. And it's called computer games. If you were to play a computer game, then you would see in your visual effects on screen the only thing that would be streaming into your awareness. So if you were to walk into a castle on your computer game and your figure was walking into the castle, you're walking into the entrance, but the kitchen was on the right. Now you wouldn't see the kitchen on your computer screen, but if you moved your figure to the right and went into the kitchen, into this virtual castle, it would appear in front of you. We now know that's exactly what happens in this world at a material level. What we observe is what's on our screen. When we're not looking at it, it exists in a state of possibility. Now, every time I turn my character right in that basement, it's going to go into the kitchen. It's always there because it's been coded that way. Every time I walk upstairs into my bedroom, it's there because it's been coded that way. But if we perceive that the bedroom is there when we're not looking at it, we're just not up to speed with the latest in quantum science, because that is what's been bemusing scientists for the last 100 years. And we now know that we have a model to understand it called the virtual model. So when people first come across the concept of us living in a virtual reality, in a virtual construct, if you like, very similar to a computer game, one of the first questions they ask is, well, who put us here? Are we literally being in a machine where we're plugged in to feed some Matrix-style artificial intelligence? Well, I don't think so. I think the energy that creates us, that brings us here, has a larger word in science that, again, is very confusing. It's called consciousness. It's our consciousness that is driving this experience. And there's many different ways to look at it. In fact, one of the popular modes of science right now that's picking up ground is something called biocentrism, which essentially means that your world is a projection of your consciousness. The truth with a capital T is very simple. We don't know the truth. We have limitations as to our awareness.
If we were living in a simulation, there would have been a start point. Now, scientists have struggled with the idea of the Big Bang because they'd be, well, where did the Big Bang come from? How did it start? So in terms of a digital Big Bang, it makes a lot of sense because any computer simulation that we have, like The Sims or Grand Theft Auto, there's nothing of that universe until you click on the button. So you can take that forward and imagine that our universe is that PlayStation environment, obviously a lot more advanced, but it makes a lot more sense because then you can understand that before that Big Bang there wasn't anything because the button hadn't been pushed.
It almost proves that there was a more intelligent or bigger being who created us. Don't you think so?
Yes, I do, and I think that's one of the biggest problems or kind of dichotomies with the argument of the simulation theory for most scientists, because most scientists are atheists. But then if you subscribe to the simulation model, it becomes quite troubling because then all of a sudden you do have to accept the possibility or the probability of a higher power or a higher intelligence or a creator. And that has to become a reality at that point. And I think that's something that a lot of scientists and people, myself included, struggle with because it goes against everything that you've come to think of at that point.
it's hard to quantify what we've seen and heard. Searching for the truth in the realms of the paranormal seems to be an impossible task. For every expert in one field, there seems to be an opposite authority at the other end with equally compelling arguments. Maybe the reason we struggle to find a definitive answer is that every experience or happening is open to interpretation, and as humans we look at things in distinct and different ways.
Our own subjective experience is not always, however convincing it is, the actual best way of judging whether a thing is true. We think it is. It's often the worst possible criterion for judging the truth of something.
It's been a really amazing journey, and starting as a believer and given all the evidence, I have become more cynical in certain aspects of my beliefs and probably more open on other ideas. I mean, the notion that anyone's viewpoint or school of thinking has all the answers seems impossible now. I mean, just because one instance of phenomena is proven to be fake doesn't mean that all of them are.
You stop anyone in Oxford Street, from 100 people, 90 will tell you, oh yes, I had déjà vu, oh yeah, I had telepathy, oh I believe in life after death, I've seen a ghost, I've seen UFOs. We are all intuitives, which means we are psychics. We have certain psychic ability.
Even after everything we've seen, I still think a lot of what we perceive to be supernatural events are just anomalies in our universe that we are not yet equipped to understand.
I think as humans, our desire to understand reality currently outweighs our ability to understand it.
When we started out this journey, I wasn't really sure what I was expecting to find out or to discover about myself or about other phenomena. I really wanted to see something that I was skeptical about actually happen. I wanted to have my mind changed. And to a certain extent, a few things have happened, a few things I've seen have altered my opinion to an extent, but I don't think that they've changed my mind. So if somebody was to say to you now, do you believe more or do you believe less than when you came into this? What would you say?
I believe more, but I believe more in different things.
Now, more than ever, I think that as humans we crave purpose and meaning, and if we can't find it, we'll create or embellish something, anything to fill that void. One thing we have discovered along the way is that everyone has an opinion or a story about the supernatural. It's a theme that seems to permeate every culture, and one thing that we can be sure of is that it's not going to disappear anytime soon.